All right, let's talk about SpaceX's Starship. This is the gigantic rocket that's supposed to take American astronauts back to the moon. But you've probably seen the headlines. The timelines keep shifting, and those test flights have been, well, pretty explosive. So our source material today is asking a really big question. What is the actual cost of this incredible promise? Let's dive in and see what's really going on.
So you hear this, right? That was Elon Musk himself, just last year, basically saying, hey, don't worry about us. Starship won't be the thing that slows this down. He was making it sound like Starship was all set to be the perfect partner for NASA's big return to the moon. That's a pretty bold claim to make.
But, and this is the big but, here's where the story takes a turn. According to what we're looking at today, despite all that confidence, Starship has kind of become the main hurdle, maybe even the biggest obstacle standing in the way of the Artemis moon mission.
So, how did we get here? Well, to really get it, we've got to look at the one thing you can't just make more of: time. And boy, has the schedule for this mission changed. And I mean changed in a big, big way.
Okay, check this out. Back in 2021, when SpaceX got the contract, they were telling NASA, yeah, we'll land on the moon by 2024. Fast forward to now, and Musk is talking about maybe 2027. And even more recently, NASA's own acting head is saying it's probably pushed all the way to the end of 2028. So you do the math. That's a 5-year delay from where they started. That's huge.
All right, so the timeline is one thing, but what about the rocket itself? This is where our source really digs in and shows this massive gap between the promise of Starship and the, let's say, the performance we've seen in the real world. So the promise was reach orbit in 2023. The reality? We've seen a bunch of test flights, and not one of them has actually made it to orbit. The promise was carry over 100 tons to orbit. The reality? So far, 0 tons delivered. And that dream of rapid reusability, landing a rocket and launching it again in a few hours, yeah, the reality is it's taking months to get them ready for another flight, and they're having to do major engine swaps. It's just not the same picture.
And this quote from Charlie Bolden, a former head of NASA, really puts it all into perspective. He's basically saying, look, if we at NASA were blowing up rockets at the same rate, Congress would have shut us down ages ago. It just shines a huge spotlight on the different ways SpaceX and NASA approach things.
So you have these ambitious goals on one side and the actual test results on the other. How do you explain that massive gap? Well, our source points to a really specific style of communication, and it's explained with a legal term that, well, you probably wouldn't expect to hear in a conversation about rockets. And that term is corporate puffery. So what is that? It's basically a fancy legal term for making claims that are so over the top, so exaggerated, that a reasonable person wouldn't take them as a literal fact. And get this, our source points out this isn't just some random theory. Musk has actually used this as a successful legal defense in a case about Tesla's self-driving claims. So what does this puffery sound like in the wild? Our source actually gives us a little guide. When you hear things like, we could, that's a possibility, not a promise. I'd be surprised if we didn't. Sounds pretty confident, right? But there's no commitment there. We're aiming to. That's an intention, not a hard deadline. And the word profound often gets thrown around to describe ideas that are still, way out there. Okay, so this kind of language leads to delays. We get that. But what does that mean in dollars and cents? What's the real financial hit? This is where things get serious, because the source connects these delays directly to a jaw-dropping cost for us, the taxpayers.
But before I even tell you the number, you have to understand just how insanely complex the mission plan actually is. It's not as simple as just pointing a rocket at the moon.
The plan is, well, it's wild. As our source lays it out, first you have to launch one Starship that just sits in orbit like a floating gas station. Then you have to launch, and I'm not kidding, up to dozens more Starships just to bring fuel up to that gas station. All of this involves transferring super cold fuel in space, which has never, ever been done on this scale. And only after all of that works perfectly can the actual Starship with the astronauts get its fuel and finally head to the moon. It's a lot. And that is what brings us to the big number. For a 5-year delay on all the programs that are depending on Starship, the estimated cost, according to our source, is an absolutely staggering $30 billion, paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. When you see a number like that and a plan that complex, it really makes you step back and ask a bigger question. Is this whole plan even viable? We're not just talking about the rocket anymore. We're talking about the entire strategy of how we get back to the moon. And listen to this. The source points to another former NASA head, Jim Bridenstine, who basically said this whole plan, this crazy orbital refueling thing, is so out there, so risky, that no NASA administrator he knows would have ever picked it if they'd had any other choice.
So that's where we are. The promise of Starship? Absolutely revolutionary. Game-changing, no doubt. But as our source material makes crystal clear, that incredible promise is now sitting on one side of the scale. And on the other side, a 5-year delay, a potential $30 billion price tag for taxpayers, and a flight plan that hinges on technology that has never been proven. So the big question is, which side of that scale is going to win out and define the next chapter of our journey back to the moon?